Senator Waters, your time has expired. We'll now move to question time. Senator Farrell.
President. I have a statement by leave concerning ministerial arrangements.
Leave is granted, yes.
Thank you. I advise changes to ministerial arrangements. Senator Wong will be absent from question time today on account of ministerial business overseas. In her absence, I will represent the Prime Minister, the Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Minister for International Development and the Pacific, the Minister for Defence, the Minister for Veterans Affairs, Minister for Defence Personnel and Minister for Defence Industry, in addition to all of my other responsibilities. Senator Gallagher will represent the Minister for Climate Change and Energy and the Minister for Environment and Water.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. Now move to questions, and I call Senator Liddle.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Social Services, Senator Farrell. When asked on 28th of July 2022 if the government is intending to remove compulsory income management from the Northern Territory, you told the Senate no. The instruments that give effect to the operation of compulsory income management via the Basics Card are due to sunset this Friday. Can you confirm that the government will not let these instruments sunset this week and will extend the operation of compulsory income management?
Thank you, Senator Liddle. Minister.
Thank Senator Liddle for that question and for her deep and sincere interest in this area of policy. When I answered that question on the last time it was raised, of course, the answer I gave was the correct answer, and no, we haven't been rolled. No, I don't get rolled. No, I don't get rolled. I'm simply making the observation that the statement I provided to the Senate on the last occasion, I think that I was asked this question, it was the correct answer. I think the difficulty that the opposition is having with this whole cashless debit card issue is that there's a lack of understanding that although you had this sort of policy that you were all committed to and you believed it was working and successful in the communities that you'd applied it to, all of the evidence that is now come out...
Minister, could you resume your seat, please? Senator Ruston.
Thank you, President. On a point of order, I believe the senator on this side of the chamber was asking a very specific question around the extension of instruments that relate to income management in the Northern Territory. The minister seems to be referring to the cashless debit card, which is not the subject of the actual question. Do you think you could perhaps ask the minister if he could address the issue about the proposed extension of income management via the Basics Card in the Northern Territory?
Thank you, Senator Ruston. And the minister is being directly relevant. He has responded to the question as it was asked. Please continue, Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, President. And I don't think I could have been more directly relevant or more directly answering the question that I was asked. I was asked a question about statements I'd made on a previous occasion in the Senate when I was asked similar questions, and I thought I answered that question as directly as it is possible to do. And I can't think of anything else I could have said.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Birmingham.
Thanks, Chair. President, there was one question here about whether these instruments would be extended. If Senator Farrell, who's now taken 1 minute and 56 seconds, is unable to provide that answer, he should commit to come back to the chamber and do so promptly, given they expire and sunset this week.
Thank you, Senator Birmingham. The minister was also asked about a question he'd asked previously, and he is being directly relevant. Please continue, Minister.
Thank you, President. As I was saying,
thank you, Minister. The time has expired. Senator Liddle, first supplementary.
Can the minister confirm that the Albanese government has now had a backflip on your intention to repeal the cashless debit card by introducing amendments to extend its use in Cape York, the Northern Territory, and in a voluntary capacity in the 4 other CDC trial sites?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. And once again, I thank Senator Little for her question and her interest in this area. All of the places that you've just outlined are places where we are making changes to the operation of the cashless debit card. I think the first and fundamental point, and again, I hate to lecture the opposition, but the Labor Party took this policy to the last election. We went to the people of Australia. We went to the people of Australia and we said we don't believe that this system of income management that you had established in an ideological fashion is working, and we intend to change it, and that's what we're doing. And so today and tomorrow, that's exactly what we're going to be doing in this chamber.
Thank you, Minister. The time has expired. Senator Little's second supplementary.
Thank you. So the Albanese government has announced $50 million for additional drug and alcohol treatment programs in the CDC trial sites. Does this announcement, along with the introduction of the new amendments, mean the government is finally acknowledging its policy to repeal the CDC will have serious social harm for the communities which rely on it for critical support?
Great question.
Minister.
The answer is no, and I'll tell you why, Senator Little. In March 2020, your then government committed $49.9 million in additional funding to alcohol and other drug-related treatments. So you've committed the money, but what happened? How much of that $49.9 million was spent on dealing with alcohol issues in Indigenous communities? Yes, you're right, Senator Brown. The answer is zero. Not one single dollar of that money was spent. Now, the new minister, and she's a terrific minister. I know her very well, Minister Rishworth. She should be in the Senate. She's doing such a good job.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Payman.
My question is to the Minister for Finance and the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister update the Senate on the state of the budget and some of the challenges facing the budget? Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Payman for her question and her interest in all matters relating to the Australian federal budget. When Parliament returns after this sitting week, it will be to hand down the October budget. The Treasurer and I announced last week that we will release the final budget outcome for the 21-22 financial year this Wednesday. And I think we've been very upfront about the serious challenges facing the economy and the substantial pressures hitting the budget. And one of the biggest pressures, of course, is the management of the $1 trillion of debt that was left to us by the former government. With higher interest rates, that debt will now cost the budget more to service, with billions and billions of dollars that we will need to find in the coming years that has not been provisioned for. And that, of course, is on top of the funding that was promised by the previous government for the last financial year that did not get out the door to benefit Australians, and much of which will pass over to the next financial year. Whether it's COVID support, delayed infrastructure projects, support for flood victims, there's at least $6 billion that those opposite promised to spend in the last financial year but didn't, and we will now have to pay for these as they flow over through the October budget. But the Treasurer and I have been very clear that the former government did not make provision for a lot of the costs that are going to have to be managed by this government, because this is a government of grown-ups, This is a government that actually does their work. This is the government that's methodical in our analysis, that weighs up the evidence for policy decisions, that makes those really often difficult decisions when we go through the budget process. That is our commitment to the Australian people. That's why they elected us. They wanted someone to manage the budget responsibly, to be fiscally responsible, but also to make room for all of those areas that Australians value in terms of their services and access to support.
Senator Payman, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Can the Minister explain how the Albanese government will help Australians deal with cost of living pressures in the upcoming October budget?
Thank you, Senator. Minister.
I can. Thank you, Senator Payman. We know Australians are doing it really tough, which is why our first priority is delivering responsible cost of living relief. Responsible because it needs to take some of the pressure off people, but also grow the capacity of the economy and not make the Reserve Bank's job harder. A great example of this is our childcare policy, which every member on this side is so proud of, with the legislation being introduced into the House this week. This will be a game-changer for family budgets, for our workforce and for the productive capacity of our economy. And we know what we stand for on this side: rock-solid support for game-changing, economy-building, cheaper childcare. It's a no-brainer. Sure, anyone who is serious about helping with cost of living would support cheaper childcare, and surely if you spend every day lecturing the government about cost of living, you would support that policy as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Payman, second supplementary.
What steps is the Albanese Labor government taking now that it is in charge of the budget to properly manage some of these major challenges while still delivering on its promise?
Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Payman for the supplementary. We've been responsibly assessing line by line through the budget process about where Australian taxpayers' money is going. We want to ensure that the budget is managed properly, but that we are able to meet our commitments and, of course, manage some of those incoming budget pressures. Apart from implementing our election commitments, which are obviously important in terms of our economic plan for Australia, things like cheaper childcare, cheaper medicines and fixing the aged care crisis, but we've also had to deal with issues left behind by the previous government. This includes around $5.5 billion in unavoidable spending. Around $3.5 billion of this was extending COVID relief payments in line with isolation requirements, vaccine eligibility, support for aged care facilities and replenishing medical stockpiles, all unfunded by the previous government, and around $2 billion in relation to disaster recovery, all necessary funding but not provided for.
The time has expired. Senator Patterson.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Cybersecurity, Senator Watt. On 22 September, Optus confirmed they were responding to a significant cyber attack. Can the Minister outline what steps the government has taken to protect Australians who may have had private data stolen in this attack?
Thank you, Senator Patterson. Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Patterson. I know cybersecurity is a matter you're very genuinely interested in, and I think all Australians were concerned to see this apparent cyber attack that occurred over the last few days involving Optus data, and I think that's because Australians do expect that when they hand over their personal data, particularly to corporations, that every effort will be made to keep it safe from harm. And as a result of this data breach, unfortunately, it appears that millions of Australians have been impacted in an unfortunate way. As Senator Patterson recognises, the information that we have to date is that the breach involves people's names, date of birth, phone numbers, email addresses, residential addresses, and for some customers, passport and driver's licence numbers being for sale on the dark web. So this is very concerning, I think, to many Australians. I do note, however, that Optus has advised that while a wide range of data has been breached, according to Optus, payment details and account passwords have not been compromised. So that is at least some saving grace, I guess, for Australians who have experienced this. Since the government was advised of this matter last Wednesday, the 21st of September, a range of government bodies have been working to contain the incident, including the Australian Signals Directorate, the Australian Cyber Security Centre and the Australian Federal Police. Of course, for obvious reasons, I won't go into the technical assistance and cybersecurity advice that is being provided to Optus or the wider efforts to help protect Australians, but I can assure Senator Patterson and all Australians that hundreds of Australian government staff have been working long into the night and over the weekend to stem the damage flowing from this, and I want to thank them for their efforts. The Minister for Home Affairs has, of course, been continually briefed since this issue commenced, and I note also that the Leader of the Opposition was briefed today.
Your time has expired. Senator Patterson, first supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank the Minister for his answer and for also anticipating my first supplementary question, so I'll move on to my second supplementary question. Why did it take almost 3 days for the Minister to publicly respond in the form of 3 tweets sent at three-quarter time of the grand final to the most significant cyber attack in Australian history?
Thank you, Senator Patterson. Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Patterson. I don't think that is a fair characterisation of the Minister's response to this incident. And as I say, a number of government bodies who are directly responsible for responding to these sorts of incidents were involved as soon as they were informed of it by Optus, and I'm assured that the Minister herself was continually briefed and worked with those agencies to stem the damage flowing from that. So, as I say, I don't think that's a fair characterisation of the Minister's performance or approach to this. I'm assured and I'm very confident that she has done everything that is appropriate for her to do as Minister.
Senator Patterson, second supplementary.
Thank you, Madam President. It's now 6 days since one of the largest cyber attacks in Australian history has occurred, and the Minister is yet to publicly front up to speak about what action the government has taken or when it has taken it, and to detail the actions the government has taken. When will the Minister publicly hold a press conference to answer the questions that Optus users and Australians have about this issue?
Thank you, Senator Patterson. Minister.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Senator Patterson. Again, I completely reject the premise of Senator Patterson's question, and in fact, any cursory examination of media regarding this subject over the last few days will see that the Minister has made a number of public comments about this incident, about her concern about it, about the actions that authorities are taking, and about the additional reviews that she intends to undertake in relation to cybersecurity.
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Patterson.
On relevance, Madam President, the question was when will the Minister hold a public press conference to answer questions about this matter?
And I believe the Minister's being relevant. He has outlined a number of media comments the Minister's made, but I'll hand the question back to him. He's heard your comments. Minister.
Thank you, President. And I think it's somewhat ironic that we have a member of the opposition questioning this government's approach to cybersecurity, because let's not forget that when the opposition was in power, only 1 in 4 Commonwealth entities met the essential 8 cybersecurity obligations in 2021, according to the Audit Office. The then government, now opposition, released a ransomware bill 1 year after the opposition released a discussion paper calling for a ransomware strategy. So I think any independent observer would recognise a good performance.
Senator Barbara Pocock.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister for Finance and Women. Minister, Australia now has one of the poorest paid parental leave schemes in the OECD. We're stuck at 18 weeks paid leave, with 2 weeks for partners paid at just minimum wage without superannuation, a pay cut for many working families at a critical moment in a family's life. Meanwhile, the rest of the OECD has overtaken us, with the average period of paid parental leave now around 52 weeks and close to full wage replacement in many places. Australians and organisations from across the country, parents, women, unions, employers, are united in their call for more paid parental leave for Australia's parents, especially mothers. This is one of the most common and most united points of discussion at the recent Jobs and Skills Summit, and not a voice was raised against it. When will your government increase the length of paid parental leave?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. And I thank Senator Pocock for the question and acknowledge her deep expertise in this area. As the question, or the preamble to the question implied, this was an area that was discussed at the Jobs and Skills Summit. There is a lot of support for extending the paid parental leave system in Australia. Of course, it was a scheme that was put in place by a former Labor government, because it's Labor governments that do these big things, that answer these big policy challenges. And whilst I'm not here to announce any an extension of the PPL scheme, I would say that as Minister for Women, it's something that I am looking at closely. If and when we can make room in the budget for this. We're also dealing with significant deficits across the forward estimates. We have $1 trillion of debt, which I said in my last question is getting more costly to manage, and there are no shortage of very good ideas that the government would like to fund if we had the capacity to do so. I would also say that last week I announced the Women's Economic Equality Task Force. That's chaired by Sam Mostyn. It has a great, fantastic group of 13 women. They will be providing advice to government, and I have no doubt that PPL and improvements to the PPL scheme will be a part of the work that they do. The former minister responsible for implementing the PPL scheme, Jenny Macklin, is also on that task force, and it came up at the first meeting. So I think there is agreement about the fact that we need to improve our PPL scheme, but the budget is under real stress, and I have to manage those challenges as well.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, first supplementary.
Thank you, Minister. Those supporting increased paid parental leave know that we can afford it, and we can afford it now. We can afford to increase the length of leave, the rate of payment and pay superannuation on it. Rather than give a $9,000 tax cut to the 227 politicians in this building and to the very well-off, we can redirect stage 3 tax cuts to the parents who need it most. Will you set aside the stage 3 tax cuts and instead improve paid parental leave?
Thank you, Senator Pocock. Minister Gallagher.
Our position on stage 3 tax cuts hasn't changed, and I would also say that the amount of good ideas that are coming to the government would more than exceed the allocations related to that. I'm just making the point that in the Greens policies alone, I think would have the Greens policies alone would spend that 10 times over. On the point of PPL, I genuinely, and the government genuinely wants to look at how we can progress this when we have the room in the budget to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pocock, second supplementary.
And you mentioned Jenny Macklin in her second reading speech in the introduction of the first paid parental leave bill in 2010. She drew attention to the need to pay superannuation on paid parental leave. But here we are 11 years on and no progress on that front. We must make sure that mothers in particular don't find themselves living in poverty after a lifetime of work and care. Why should the price of care be poverty in old age? Will your government ensure that all periods of parental leave are covered by superannuation payments so that parents aren't left behind?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and I look forward to working with Senator Pocock to advance women's economic equality in this country. It is absolutely a priority for this government, as you would have seen in some of the policies that we took to the election and some of the ways we raised the level of interest in women's economic equality at the Jobs and Skills Summit. So I do look forward to working with anyone in this chamber who wants to genuinely progress economic equality. And obviously super on paid parental leave has always been part of the discussion. I have no doubt that the Women's Economic Equality Task Force will be looking at this and providing me with advice in the near term.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Polley.
President, my question is to the Minister for Trade and Tourism, Senator Farrell. Could the minister provide an update on the progress of the Albanese Labor governments to diversify Australia's export markets?
Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Polley for her deep and abiding interest in this issue, and a particular interest to her home state of Tasmania. After a decade of the Liberal government, Australia is more dependent than ever on a single market for our exports. Placing all your trade eggs in one basket has proven to be bad economic strategy. The COVID-19 global pandemic supply chain volatility, which have been exacerbated by Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine and Chinese trade blockages, have exposed the growing risks for Australian exporters, jobs and prosperity. To address these challenges, the Albanese Labor government is implementing a trade diversification plan that will provide opportunities for Australian businesses to gain new market access into major markets and facilitate inward investment to help build the infrastructure for the green economy. The Liberal government dropped the ball by failing to conclude parliamentary processes to enable entry into force of the Australia-UK Free Trade Agreement and the Australian-Indian Economic Cooperation and Trade Agreement. Unlike the previous government, the Albanese Labor government...
Minister, please resume your seat. Order. 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 Senator Bilyk.
President, I'm having quite a lot of trouble hearing, and for a side of parliament with no policies, I think they should listen.
It's not an opportunity
But
to make comments.
I seriously cannot hear him.
Thank you. I will ask. Order, senators. Order. Order. Senator McKenzie. Minister, please continue, and I'd ask senators to listen quietly.
Thank you, President. Unlike the previous government, the Albanese Labor government is working hard to conclude all treaty and legislative processes to enable implementation of the UK and India trade agreements this year. Yes, this year. Given the importance of implementing these trade deals as soon as possible, we expect support from the opposition benches in both chambers for the expeditious passage of the relevant legislation.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Polley, first supplementary.
Madam President, could the minister provide an update on the progress of the trade negotiations with the European Union?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President. Once again, thank Senator Polley for her question. Despite many years of negotiations, the Liberal government failed to land a trade deal with the European Union. In fact, negotiations stalled as a result of the Morrison's government's disrespectful treatment of a close ally. I'm happy to report that negotiations are now back on track. Last week I met with the French Trade Minister and it was a very positive discussion. In the meeting we reiterated our support for concluding the Australia-European Trade Agreement negotiations, preferably by early next year. We acknowledge that an ambitious and comprehensive trade deal would provide an opportunity to boost two-way trade and investment with further strengthen our bilateral relationships. On the same day, I also met with members of the European Parliament's Committee on International Trade. It's clear that the Albanese government's strong commitment to address climate change...
Your time has expired. Senator Polley, second supplementary.
Madam President, the minister recently participated in trade negotiations to launch the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. What is the framework and how will participation benefit Australia? Minister.
Minister.
Thank you, President, and once again thank Senator Polley. Earlier this month I did join ministers from 13 other partners across the Indo-Pacific in Los Angeles to launch negotiations for the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Together, IPEF members represent over 40% of global GDP and for Australia, 8 of our top 10 trading partners. At the meeting, it was agreed that negotiations would cover a range of new and emerging issues on trade, supply chains, clean energy, decarbonisation and infrastructure, as well as tax and anti-corruption. Launching IPEF negotiations is a significant step in the future of greater economic cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. It brings together the United States, North and South Asian partners, including India, and most importantly, our Pacific neighbour, Fiji. IPEF is an important element of the Albanese Labor government's trade diversification agenda.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Roberts.
The question is to Senator Gallagher, representing the Minister for Health. Minister, I understand that the TGA is conducting a review of their ban on prescribing ivermectin for COVID. Can the Minister confirm this review is underway, state the return date and advise the Senate of the current advice to medical professionals on the use of ivermectin for COVID-19?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Roberts for the question. I understand the TGA received an application from a doctor to amend the poison standard in relation to ivermectin, and I think that kicks off an automatic process, which the application is to remove those restrictions that were placed on ivermectin when it began being prescribed to treat COVID-19. And so the application is to enable GPs to be able to prescribe it. I think that kicks off a process which is automatic in the TGA, and the application is currently open for public consultation until the end of this month. And then it will be discussed at the ACMS, by the ACMS at their next meeting on the 9th of November, and an interim decision is expected by February 2023. And a final decision later in 2023. I understand in terms of advice, whilst this process is underway, separately, there hasn't been any change in advice around from the TGA, which led them to put those restrictions on ivermectin as a prescription for COVID-19, that hasn't changed.
Senator Roberts, first supplementary.
On August 31st this year, the Brazilian University of São Paulo published a peer-reviewed paper that found regular use of ivermectin as a prophylaxis for COVID-19 led to a 92% reduction in COVID-19 mortality rate amongst their sample of 88,000 subjects, a 92% reduction in mortality. Minister, how much more proof does this government need to overturn the ban on ivermectin today and stop costing lives?
Thank you. Senator Roberts. Minister.
Thank you. Well, I have full trust and faith in the processes that the TGA implement in terms of making advice and recommendations and placing restrictions, in this case on the use of ivermectin. I would say that there's a range of academic research, not all that would be putting the case as you put it. I've seen other studies that have been done that show that there is no clinical benefit from using ivermectin. So I think, and that isn't unusual. That isn't unusual in some of these trials. It isn't unusual to have a significant difference of opinion. But from my point of view, the TGA has served us very well through this pandemic. They have provided very good advice. Their processes are rigorous and thorough. And this process that's now underway, I'm sure we'll look at the issues that have been raised by this doctor, but as far as I can see, there's no reason to change.
Senator Roberts, second supplementary.
Whether separate from or part of a Royal Commission, Minister, will you conduct an inquiry into the failure of medical advice on ivermectin, and specifically, who made the decision to ban ivermectin, who is responsible for the harm that came from that decision, and when will you apologise to the politicians and medical professionals who were right all along?
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Minister.
Thank you. Well, I think we have a fundamental disagreement happening here. I do not accept the position that you're putting, Senator Roberts. I understand you have a particular view on this, but I believe that the Therapeutic Goods Administration have operated very well during this pandemic. The Prime Minister has made it clear that at the right time, when we're through the pandemic, that you would definitely have a review of some sort into looking at our response to the pandemic, but I do not accept the proposition that you're putting about the use of ivermectin. The evidence that's before the TGA is that there did need to be restrictions placed on it. It's not the only drug where there are restrictions placed on it. There are other medicines that cannot be prescribed by GPs or where they have to go through a process, but based on the information the TGA has provided, they see good reason to put those restrictions on, and that other process which I spoke of in the first answer will report back on those dates that I've outlined.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Henderson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Farrell. Since July, the opposition has been calling on the government to adopt the Coalition's online privacy bill, which reflects the urgent need for greater online privacy protections on social media and other platforms such as those run by telecommunications companies. What steps has the government taken to prioritise these reforms?
Thank you, Senator. Minister Farrell.
Thank Senator Henderson for her question in this important topic, and of course it's got that extra element of importance as a result of the cyber security threats that we saw last week and over the weekend in respect of Optus. I think the starting point for a discussion about this, and I think this is what we've discovered, is that how little the previous government did in this space, and that the problems that we've now inherited are problems because
Minister, please resume your seat. Senator Henderson.
Thank you, Madam President. Point of order on relevance. It's a very specific question that I asked. What steps has the government taken to prioritise the reforms in the online privacy bill proposed by the coalition?
I don't need the question repeated. I've taken notes of the question. I believe the minister is being relevant, and I'll continue to listen to make sure the elements of your question are answered. Minister.
Well, look, I was trying to explain that the reason that we need legislation in this space is, of course, because the previous government did nothing about it. And I noticed Senator Hume's comments over the weekend, where she said, "We don't have policies. We are in opposition, not in government." And I think what's now very clear is not only does the opposition not have policies in opposition, they never had any policies in government.
Please resume your seat. Senator Henderson.
A point of order on relevance. I would ask the senator to be relevant to the online privacy bill and whether the government is taking any steps to prioritise these important reforms.
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister, I'll just refer you back to the question that was asked by Senator Henderson.
Thank you, President. Look, the Albanese Labor government is committed to protecting Australia's personal information. The rise of the digital platforms and the use of modern technology has created a whole host of new privacy challenges and risks that we saw over the weekend, including the collection and the use of a vast amount of personal information by social media platforms. Australians should have better control over how their personal data is collected and used, and confidence that when they engage with a business or a government agency, their data will be protected and not misused.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Henderson, first supplementary.
The Optus cyber attack must surely be a wake-up call about the urgent need for greater online privacy protections. Isn't it the case that the government has been asleep at the wheel on both the need for the online privacy bill and broader reforms of the Privacy Act to which the coalition committed when in government?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Farrell.
Senator Henderson, you can't be serious about asking. You cannot be serious about asking that question. You cannot be serious about asking that question because for 10 years, including in time when you were in the lower house, for 10 years you did nothing about this issue. And of course we find that the issues that occurred last week with Optus have occurred in a set of circumstances where there is no legislative protection based on all of the years you had to deal with it. Now, we do intend to protect Australians' privacy. Yeah, we do intend to protect it. I might point out to you, Senator Henderson, we've only been in government for a few months. You had 10 years. You had 10 long years to try and. You had 10 long years. You had 10 long years to.
Thank you, Senator Farrell. I'm just going to wait for quiet, Senator Henderson, before I invite you to ask your second supplementary. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. As part of the former government's consultation on the online privacy bill, Optus argued that telecommunications companies should be exempt from tougher online privacy laws. More broadly, Telstra and Optus also argued against consumers having the right to erase their personal data. Does the government agree that telecommunications companies should be exempt from tougher online privacy laws?
I'm not going to call the minister until there's quiet. Minister.
For that protection. Look, I doubt whether Optus is running that argument today, Senator Henderson, but can I say this? The Attorney-General and the Attorney-General's Department has engaged extensively with experts, community organisations, businesses and privacy advocates on his proposed Privacy Act. And the department so far, and I'm happy to provide these to you, has provided 2 consultation papers. It's received 434 submissions and held a series of round tables. So I don't think...
Senator Henderson, please wait until you're called before you... So please go ahead.
A very specific question I asked on relevance. Does the government agree that telecommunications companies should be exempt from tougher online privacy laws?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. I do believe the minister's being relevant. Minister, please continue.
Thank you. I started out my answer, Senator Henderson, by saying that I doubt very much whether Optus is now pursuing that particular argument. Well, I've explained to you all of the things that the Attorney-General is doing in order to consult with all of the relevant organisations.
Thank you, Minister. Your time has expired. Senator Shoebridge.
My question with minimal notice is to Senator Watt, representing the Attorney-General. Former Senator Rex Patrick is in the federal court challenging the Information Commissioner for unreasonable delays in dealing with Freedom of Information reviews. These delays impact everyone trying to get answers from the government. While in opposition, now Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus provided an affidavit supporting Patrick's case. Despite this, under the now new Attorney-General, the Commonwealth continues to oppose the case. As at 1 August 2022, the total external legal costs incurred by the Commonwealth in opposing Patrick's case were a whopping $301,667.12. Consistent with the sworn affidavit of now Attorney-General Mark Dreyfus, and noting that some matters remain unresolved more than 1,000 days after referral, will Labor now support the case of former Senator Patrick to prevent unreasonable delays in dealing with Freedom of Information reviews?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister Watt.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Shoebridge, for the question. I appreciate the advance warning of the question as well. Well, that's common courtesy. You might want to learn a little bit of that.
Order.
I always displayed common courtesy to you through opposition. Maybe you could
Minister
do the same.
Watt, interjections across the chamber are disorderly from both sides. Order. Minister Watt, please continue.
Goodness.
Thank you, President. Senator Shoebridge's question goes to legal action undertaken by former Senator Rex Patrick, who I think all of us would recognise made a bit of a name for himself here in the accountability arena. I understand from Senator Farrell that now Mr Patrick, former Senator Patrick, is running for a Lord Mayoralty in South Australia, so I presume that he'll bring the same level of accountability to that role should he be successful. In direct answer to the question, this matter, as you have recognised, is currently before the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, so it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment. But there can be no doubt whatsoever as to this government's commitment to transparency, in contrast to the abhorrent and willful ignorance of transparency that we saw for 10 years under the former government. We are on the verge of introducing legislation to introduce and establish a new National Anti-Corruption Commission. I see Senator Mackenzie welcoming that, and I wonder why it didn't happen for any of the 10 years that she and her colleagues were in government. Perhaps one day we can talk about that outside the chamber and she can illuminate me on that. But that is just one example of how this government intends to be far more transparent about its actions than what we saw for 10 years under the coalition. And as I say, this matter before the AAT will be resolved, and that's the appropriate forum in which for us to discuss this matter.
Senator Shoebrig's first supplementary.
Well, we're talking about transparency and taking you at your word, Senator, that you're committed to transparency. Well, can you now provide an updated cost of how much this case has cost the Commonwealth to today? It was $301,667 fighting transparency as at the 1st of August 2022. How much has been spent to date?
Thank you, Senator Shoebrig. Minister.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Shoebridge. I can absolutely assure you that I'm happy to provide that information. I will have to take the details on notice. I don't have that figure at hand, but I will take that on notice and get back to the Senator ASAP.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Shoebridge, second supplementary.
Well, it gets worse, because in a recent letter to the Attorney-General, the Information Commissioner said her office was underfunded and revealed that in 2020-21, the now 667 Freedom of Information reviews were more than a year old, increase of some 50% in that year. Would you agree, Minister, would you agree that any funding for the Information Commissioner might be better spent not in court arguing against someone suing against unreasonable delays, but instead staffing the office to respond on time?
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. Minister.
Thank you, President, and thank you, Senator Shoebridge. I well remember, Senator Shoebridge, the resourcing difficulties that the Information Commissioner had over the period of the former government, because on a regular occasions I asked the Information Commissioner about exactly that matter in Senate estimates when we were in opposition. And it was disgraceful the way that the former government starved the Information Commissioner of resources in the way that it did. Now, already, though, today, every question we've had from the Greens, as has been the case in other settings as well, calls for this government to spend more money. And we have to recognise that we have inherited a complete financial mess from the former government. Earlier today, you were asking us to spend more money on paid parental leave, a worthy thing to do. Now you're asking us to spend more money on Information Commissioner, a worthy thing to do. I'm sure your next question will ask us to spend $11 billion on something else. We will weigh up all of those things
Minister Watt,
and make the commitments that we can afford to do.
Minister Watt, please resume your seat. Senator Shoebridge.
This question wasn't about additional funding. The minister's not been responsive to the question. This question was about, instead of spending it on lawyers, spend it on the Information Commissioner.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. The minister is being relevant. You've got 1 second left. Have you finished?
I refer to my earlier answer.
Thank you. Senator Sheldon.
My question is to the Minister for Emergency Management, Senator Watt. Can the minister please update the Senate on recent rain and subsequent flooding recorded in central and northern New South Wales and in the Gold Coast hinterland?
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. Minister Watt.
Thanks, President, and thanks, Senator Sheldon, for the question. And can I thank Senator Sheldon publicly for the tremendous work that he is performing as the government's Special Envoy for Disaster Recovery, a new position that was created by this government in recognition that our disaster-affected communities need all the support that they can get. And I personally thank Senator Sheldon for visiting around a dozen communities in the short time that he has held this role and providing excellent advice to both me and the government more generally about what those communities need. I think all of us have noticed that over the last week we have been closely monitoring and responding to another difficult weather system, particularly over central, west and northern New South Wales, as well as some severe thunderstorms in south-east Queensland. The worst of the flooding over the weekend was in the Namoy River in Gunnedah, with several streets, low-lying properties and businesses inundated. And I know that all of our thoughts go out to the communities that have been affected, particularly through New South Wales. There were also strong fears that Lismore would again see localised flooding, but fortunately forecasts there were downgraded. The Wilson River, which of course runs through Lismore, only peaked to minor flooding levels, this time well short of the level required to top the flood levy there. I want to commend the New South Wales SES services, both paid and volunteer personnel, for the tremendous work that they did to pre-deploy resources to affected areas and to assist vulnerable people who were still recovering from the last floods earlier this year. The action that the SES took in getting ready for these events before they hit, I think, went a long way to ensuring that people were kept safe. As of late yesterday, the New South Wales SES had received 898 requests for assistance, including 64 flood rescue activations. And, of course, South East Queensland was also affected, particularly the Gold Coast hinterland. Sadly, this flooding has taken the life of a young 5-year-old boy in Tullamore in New South Wales after the car he was travelling in was swept away by floodwaters. Again, I know that all of our thoughts go out to that family, and it's another reminder of the life-threatening danger that floods provide.
Expired. Senator Sheldon, first supplementary.
Can the Minister remind the Senate of the weather outlook for this summer and advise how the government is preparing for these potential disasters?
Minister Watt.
Senator Sheldon for the question. As I've previously told the chamber, the Bureau of Meteorology has officially declared a La Niña event for Australia, with above-average rainfall predicted for most of the east coast of the country this summer. Given that this will be our third successive La Niña event as a country, something that I'm advised is incredibly rare, the risk of flash flooding and severe flooding is even higher than we have seen previously. That's why it's vital that our emergency management agencies are working to their best ability to make sure that we are prepared. Earlier this month, I formally launched the National Emergency Management Agency, or NEMA, bringing together the capabilities of Emergency Management Australia and the National Recovery and Resilience Agency into a single agency. NEMA brings together the capabilities of both agencies to provide support, prepare for future disasters, lead the response when disaster strikes and remain deeply connected with communities during recovery. Last week I announced Mr Brendan Moon as the new Coordinator-General of this new agency. Brendan is one of Australia's foremost natural disaster professionals.
Senator Sheldon, second supplementary.
Can the Minister outline what else the Australian Government is preparing for communities for these potential natural disasters?
Minister.
Thank you, Senator Sheldon. As I've said before, good governments plan for the best and prepare for the worst. That's what we've done in establishing a new agency, in appointing one of Australia's foremost disaster professionals to head it, and taking additional action as well. It's why teams from NEMA have been out meeting with all states and territories to discuss their preparedness plans well ahead of this high-risk weather season. The briefings included a scenario-based discussion based on the BOM outlook, to better understand the risks and enhance collective preparedness for the upcoming season. But how we respond to natural disasters must not just be about the immediate response. Last sitting, this government introduced amendments to the Disaster Ready Fund legislation, and these amendments will ensure that the full $200 million allocated in the fund per year is spent on disaster mitigation, while maintaining our commitment to support communities as they recover from disasters. And we've also been rolling out important funding in New South Wales under the Emergency Response Fund for disaster mitigation projects. It's what Australians deserve, and it's a far cry from the
Minister.
I don't hold
Your
up
time
a
has
hose.
expired. Senator Mackenzie.
Fine, you're welcome. Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Can the Minister guarantee that the Albanese Labor government will put an end to the uncertainty faced by farmers and transport operators and restore the fuel tax credit scheme?
Minister. Order. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Sterle. Minister, please continue.
Thank you, President. I'm not aware of... I think the question was, are you going to restore the fuel tax credit scheme? I'll have to take that on notice, President, and come back to the chamber.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Mackenzie, first supplementary.
Thank you. National Road Freighters Association President Rod Hannafy says it all comes down to cost of living, and I quote, "Road transport is at breaking point. Drivers and operators can't keep footing the bill for rising fuel costs. Not all can easily pass these costs on, and it simply adds to the cost of living across Australia. It's unsustainable, and supply chains will soon grind to a halt if this new federal government doesn't step in. When will the Minister give industry and the Australian community certainty, given the fuel excise is due to be reinstated from Thursday this week?"
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Minister.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam President, and I will come back to the chamber if there is further information I can provide. Obviously, we are going through a range of decisions at the moment through the budget process, and I would also point out that the budget is in a terrible state, as I've been trying to make clear in all of the public statements I've been making about the budget, is that whilst there are a whole range of things and a whole range of stakeholders who would like us to invest more, to spend more and to support them during some of the increases in costs that they're experiencing, we have to balance that with the fact that you guys busted the budget. Like, you doubled the debt before the pandemic. You failed to fund ongoing programs that are ongoing, and we will have to deal with that.
Your time has expired. Senator Mackenzie, second supplementary.
Thank you. The TWU, ARTIO, NRFA and NatRoad have all written to the Treasurer calling for certainty. Rising operating costs are already impacting the sustainability of road transporters, drivers and operators who already operate on razor-thin margins. Industry groups and unions are in lockstep on this issue. When will this Labor government stop sitting on their hands and restore the fuel tax credit scheme?
Thank you, Senator Mackenzie. Order. Order.
Is that a policy?
Minister.
Thank you, President. Well, I've already undertaken to come back to the Senate if there is further information that I can provide. But the government is currently weighing up a whole range of different requests and challenges facing the budget. We are going through that process now. And whilst there are a whole range of areas where people want us to invest more or respond to a particular challenge, we have to deal with these matters in a fiscally responsible way. That is the government that we are going to be. And if there is anything further that I can provide, President, I will come back to the chamber with it.
Thank you, Minister. Senators, the minister has the right to respond to the question in silence, as does the person asking the question. I'd ask you to show some respect. Senator Urquhart.
My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Indigenous Australian, Senator Gallagher. Can the minister outline the latest details in the government's plan to deliver an Indigenous voice to Parliament?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Urquhart for the question. As senators would know, the Albanese government has committed to implementing the Uluru Statement in full, and we will hold a referendum to enshrine an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice in the Constitution in this term of Parliament. This will be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to recognise our First Nations people in our founding legal document and to make Australia a better place for everybody. Because no matter what side of politics you're on, I think we can all agree that something needs to be done, and as a country we can do better. The voice is about making a practical difference. It's about addressing poor outcomes from the long legacy of failed programs and broken policies by listening to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people about what works. The government will this week convene the first formal meeting of the referendum working group. This group will provide advice to government on the big questions that need to be considered in the coming months. Firstly, the timing to conduct a successful referendum. Secondly, refining the proposed constitutional amendment and question. And thirdly, information on the voice necessary for a successful referendum.
Senator Farrell.
We're trying to we're trying to listen to the issue of the
order. Senator Farrell. Order. I would ask all senators to listen to the response from Minister Gallagher in silence and not. Senator Nampijinka-Price, in particular, you've been disorderly throughout her response. Please continue, Senator Gallagher.
Thank you. Thirdly, the information on the voice necessary for a successful referendum. Its work will be complemented by the establishment of a second group, the Referendum Engagement Group, that will be tasked to build community understanding and awareness for the referendum. The groups comprise a broad cross-section of representatives from First Nations communities across Australia, and they will ensure that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander views are front and centre in the decision-making leading up to the referendum.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Urquhart, first supplementary.
Can the minister outline to the Senate how the Albanese Labor government's commitment to delivering a voice to Parliament will make a difference for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I'm very happy to answer that question. A voice to Parliament will be about hearing from the grassroots, from the community, about what can be done better. It's a direct line to Parliament to make a practical difference in areas like housing, keeping children in schools, in education, in health, in infrastructure, in community safety. It's about local communities finding local solutions to local problems. And the idea of a voice came from those communities. It's about ensuring First Nations Australians are heard, that they're heard on policies, that they're heard on laws, that they're heard on what works. And I would encourage everybody in this chamber to get involved in the discussion, even if you disagree or have a difference of appointment, and work together to bring about this nation-building change.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Urquhart, second supplementary.
Can the minister outline to the Senate why a voice to Parliament is important for all Australians?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam President. And I thank Senator Urquhart for the question. Well, it's about respect, really, isn't it? It's about respect. It's about listening to First Nations people. It's about ensuring that our Constitution recognises the longest continuous living culture in the world is reflected in our country's Constitution. Our founding document is reflected. That's what it's about. Everyone wants to work together to make Australia a better place, and that's why all of us have a role to play in this debate. It is about talking to friends. It's about listening to what's being proposed, even if you have a different view, but being part of the discussion. It's not a radical proposal. It's a fair and practical change, and I urge everybody to get involved in the discussion.
Your time has expired. Senator Farrell.
President, could I ask that further questions be put on notice?
Yes, thank you.
And I also have a further response to Senator Little's question of myself. I'd like to add some additional information to the answer I provided to Senator Little on the topic of income management. While income management legislation in the Social Security Administration Act of 1999 does not sunset, it operates through a number of legislative instruments that sunset every 10 years. These instruments enable income management to operate in specific locations and/or income management measures. 6 of these legislative instruments were due to sunset on the 1st of October 2022, and I think that's what you were referring to. In order for the government to consult effectively with communities on the future of income management, the Attorney-General has agreed to deferral of the 6 instruments for a period of 12 months. Our consultation with communities will then direct the future of income management. Product-level blocking technology will be maintained under our government's plan to support participant and merchants under the Enhanced Income Management Program. It will reduce the stigma associated with the business card under the current Income Management Program.
Senator Birmingham.
President, pursuant to Standing Order 74.5, which requires that questions on notice be answered within 30 days, I, at the request of Senators Cash and Bragg, seek an explanation from the Minister representing the Prime Minister as to why answers to questions on notice numbers 98, 126, 127, 128, 129, 139, 196, 197, 198, 199, 200, 201, 202, 203, 204, 205, 254, 255, 256, 257, 289 and 326 have not been provided within the requisite 30 days.
Senator Farrell.
Thank you, Deputy President. Well, Minister Birmingham would know something about unanswered questions on notice. After all, he was the minister representing the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, as recently as just a few months ago. And can I tell you the number about the former Prime Minister's track record on questions on notice? When the election was called, the former Prime Minister had a total of 128 unanswered parliamentary questions on notice. 128. And it wasn't just parliamentary questions on notice that were left unanswered. The Prime Minister's own department had a total of 391 unanswered questions on notice from Senate estimates. 391. I'm advised that the Prime Minister will answer these questions in due course, but we're not going to be lectured by the opposition after the government routinely failed to answer questions on notice in a timely fashion.